Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Sunday Shot in a week which has been jam-packed with politics, domestic and international. The international coming to our shores in the form of President Herzog from Israel. We've got a lot to talk about, and we've got a great panel to talk about it. First up, of course, I'm going to introduce my co-host on the Sunday Shot and editor of the shot itself, Dave Milner. Dave, hello.
Joe, hello. How are we? Hello, everybody.
Very well, thank you. And joining us to get into the conversation is reader's editor of Crikey and founder of Z-Feed, Crystal Andrews. Hi, Crystal. Thank you.
Hello, nice to be back.
And joining us again is a friend of the show, Deep Cut News's Antoun Issa. Hello, Antoun. Thank you for joining us again on
Hello.
the shot.
Yes. Hello, friends. Good to be back.
It has been a week. We're going to get into the change of leadership of the Liberal Party. Dave was protesting that, and I said, we've got to talk about a change of leadership of one of our major parties. And he pulled me up and said, well, is it one of our major parties these days? And that is a very good point. But before we get into the fact that, well, they've gone and done it and elected Angus Taylor, Crystal, the Libs, the coalition, when they're together, they always seem to make it about them on days that would otherwise be about things of national significance. We'll recall Little Proud throwing a tantrum and leaving the coalition for the second time in less than a year on the day of reflection for the morning of the Bondi massacre. This week, they chose to make it all about them, and indeed specifically on the day that Albanese would have been reporting and did report into more or less a vacuum on closing the gap for 2026.
Yes, they have a habit of finding, really significant, important moments for other groups and as you said, just making it about them. But yeah, the initial sort of backgrounding and indications that there was going to be a spill came on the day that Albanese was handing down the 2026 Closing the Gap report. So I definitely encourage everybody to go and check out. There's some reporting on the ABC, some on the SBS, but National Indigenous Times had quite a bit of reporting on what was in this year's update. I believe the next round of those progress, how well we're tracking towards the social targets, doesn't get reported on until next month, I think in March. There was some funding that's been announced for maintenance and repair to Aboriginal community health centres. There was a big announcement of funding for job programs in remote communities. So there's that sort of stuff. But I did just want to read a statement that two of the Uluru Dialogue co-chairs, Auntie Pat Anderson and Professor Megan Davis, gave in response to the Closing the Gap report. National Indigenous Times has like quite extensive reporting on their response in and amongst everything they've done on this, because I just think it nailed exactly on the head what some of the elements of Albanese's speech for this report kind of made me feel uncomfortable in a little way. So this is what they said. It is a profound irony for governments to caution ordinary people against naming failure when that failure belongs to the policymakers, not the governed. The Prime Minister's pull yourself up by the bootstraps address will offer little solace to communities burdened by suffocating bureaucratic control. It may, however, reassure the coalition that Howard's ideological DNA continues to shape Indigenous policy 3 decades on, despite decades of demonstrable failure. So, yeah, that all got completely lost the tail end of this week, but very important, and we shouldn't lose sight of it.
Yeah, and Megan has been doing quite a lot of work on just as is said in that statement, just the sort of suffocating bureaucracy, the layers and layers for every one First Nations person working at senior levels in government or public office more broadly. They seem to have to sit on dozens of committees, and it's endless reporting, endless accountability from the governed, not those who are supposed to be governing and making things better for the people in our democracy. So, yeah.
Isn't it interesting that the Liberal Party's internal nonsense that they're doing at the moment is benefiting the ALP right now, covering up these quite fair and damning statements on the Closing the Gap report, further, I guess further entrenching my belief that this is just an establishment class that doesn't give a fuck about the rest of us, no matter what color T-shirt they're wearing.
Well, I think that is the issue, and this is happening at a state level nationwide, particularly in places like, well, I would argue here, but certainly Western Australia and South Australia, and indeed Victoria, where the Liberal Party or the coalition where it exists is in such disarray broadly that bad governments are not being held to account at all. By anyone. And, we saw that this week with the Labor Party just making hay, having a great time, and actually even getting in a few good lines against the odds, whilst the Liberal Party just basically tore themselves to shreds. And it's that lack of accountability, Antoun, that I think is so damaging for our democracy, particularly when we have such mediocre governments.
Right. And I think it speaks to, I guess, the trend that we're seeing, right? We're seeing the collapse, yes, or the implosion of the coalition, the implosion, like a fracturing of the right. But I think as a result of that, we're seeing a collapse in meaningful opposition to governments. And I mean, from the view of Victoria, I feel like we've had a one-party state for quite some time. There just hasn't been an opposition holding the successive Labor governments to account. And then what ends up happening, we're starting to see snippets of, which is something that would happen irrespective of who's in power, right? When a government entrenches itself into the state and there is longevity with that, without any sense or fear that they're going to be removed, then they feel invincible, and they take that invincibility and they keep stretching that. And we saw the kind of violent kind of eruption of that in New South Wales I know we'll get to that later, with the protests, but it's a manifestation of, I think, an attitude that's seeping inside of the Labor Party, that they feel like they're invincible and they don't really have to be kind of like doing a lot of effort, as Dave said, because no one's going to hold them accountable.
No. And
I'd also kind of add that that's happening in a global context where powerful are feeling invincible and unaccountable to anyone.
I mean,
Yeah.
and the idea that so when you have a really authoritarian, racist Labor Party government, the idea that the opposition to that is coming further from the right, from a bunch of private school nutcases, like, as a concept, that's flawed. That's absurd.
It is. It absolutely is.
Which is it's kind of the default that I think our establishment operates in. When I say the establishment, I also say the media establishment, right? Like, every time I turn on the ABC, it's, the opposition leaders say on a Labor announcement or a quote from the government. And I'm like, why are we just limiting ourselves to this statist kind of party, which is the Labor Party, which is lurching further and further to the authoritarian right, I would say. And the further right to that, responding to that. Our discourse needs to be, we need to expand the parameters of discourse a bit.
So as they get more authoritarian and more right-wing, the next couple of years, our entire media is just going to be, okay, what does Angus Taylor think about this? Again, flawed at the concept stage. What are we doing in this country? It's obscene.
Well, let's just hope that it doesn't, as it already has started to do, start saying, what does Pauline Hanson think about this? And now introducing her into the preferred prime minister polling, even though she's in the Senate, she'll never be prime minister. She never would be anyway. It's ludicrous. But talking of private school nutcases, Crystal, this week I mean, no one
Me?
really. I didn't really think that they would do it. No, not you, Crystal. I didn't really think that they would do it. I mean, because Angus Taylor has demonstrated again and again that he is just a vacuous, empty suit when it comes to policy development. He looks like a political leader from central casting, but there is absolutely nothing backing it up. And yet, this week he won 34-17. It was a comprehensive victory over Susan Lee. What do you think, your first take on it, Crystal? Was it Susan Lee's failings as a leader? Was it just that the Liberal Party were never really comfortable with the idea of having a female leader? They need that bloke in a suit up front. Was it a combination of both of these things? Does it even matter at this point?
Yeah, look, I think it's definitely a combination, for me at least, a combination of both of those things. I know some people have been really putting the emphasis on, like, Susan Lee being the first female leader of the Liberal Party, and that's being somehow, like, really important in all of this. That argument just, like, never resonated with me from the beginning, because making her leader, I mean, to be clear, the Liberal Party and the Coalition, but the Liberal Party in particular, absolutely has a problem with women. It has been losing female voters since about the mid to late 90s. It's at catastrophic levels for them now. Like, that absolutely is an issue. But them installing Lee as the leader after Peter Dutton lost the election was just like a surface level gesture at that problem. They just said, okay, here's a woman, and let's not change anything else about it except for putting her in the top position. Not only was it a gesture by them, Lee herself didn't really introduce any new ideas or policy platforms or change the discussion that the party was having around its appeal to Australian women at all. So, like, I don't think we could make the case that she had to be protected because she was doing some, she just needed more time to perform some great turnaround for the Liberal Party's fortunes with women, because she just never really appeared to be particularly very interested in that. The whole thing was quite surface level. So that's never resonated with me. At the same time, she also was really bad at this job, and her being a woman doesn't mean that she could not and did not absolutely suck at it. I mean, she politicized a national tragedy in the
Yeah.
Bondi attack immediately. And so she has a significant responsibility in the turning of so many Australian communities against each other in the immediate aftermath of that. That is not the role of a political leader, regardless of their gender. That's an awful thing to do. I mean, we will all talk about how Angus Taylor is a dummy, to put it bluntly.
Yeah.
But Susan Lee also said some really dumb things during her 9 months as the leader of the Liberals. The Joy Division T-shirt thing, like, that was just it was a bad job. She just did a bad job as leader, and we shouldn't be afraid of saying that just because she's a woman. But having said all of that, like I said, the Liberal Party does have a problem with women. I think she was definitely rolled by a bit of a boys' club. And I also think that Australia in general, our country, our national identity, our society is very masculinist. Like, you often talk to people who've come here from, Europe or, the Middle East, even from America, from other places. And after they've had a little bit of time in Australia, we'll often say, like, oh, things are really gendered here. You go to barbecues and dinner parties and, like, all the men talk to the men, all the women talk to the women. Like, those traditional, like, expectations of women and men are really ingrained into our society. And so when you look at, again, Susan Lee's very, very bad polling numbers, which is another sign that she was doing a bad job. Like, I do think that there is an element of the Liberal Party, the Coalition, and Australia at large putting a much harsher criticism on a female leader than a male leader. Like, that is true. But I absolutely don't think that exempts her from the just absolutely arse job that she did at this.
I agree with all of that, Crystal. I mean, the thing I push back on is I think saying dumb things is actually the job of the leader of the Liberal Party. I think they're
Fair.
kind of meant to do that. It's speaking to their base. I remember saying it on this show last season that not only will she get rolled by a blokes club, I think she was put there by a blokes club. You know, you give the female CEO the job as the company's crashing, and then you let
glass
the
cliff.
bloke handle the rebuild phase. It's what the glass cliff, perfect phrasing for it. Yeah, it's what the patriarchy does. Now, the only thing I want to add to this conversation is that Angus Taylor's Facebook page is filled with comments that just say, fantastic, great move, well done, Angus, in honor of that time when he logged into the wrong account and gave himself the props. So, like, that's heartening. I still like that sense of fuck this shit that we still have in this country, but it's a debacle. I expect nothing intelligent, nothing productive out of whoever takes this job, and it is going to allow the Labor Party to become worse, and it will allow One Nation vote to grow. That's what's going to happen.
It's really clear that there was, I mean, I think that there was no option but to switch out leader. Like, they couldn't have a leader with as bad polling numbers as Susan Lee had and stick with that.
So
and
she was
pretend
down
it was
to
okay. So I
minus
think they had to do
39.
something.
Yeah, down at minus 39.
On that,
Exactly.
Trump's approval rating is down to 29, and they've just announced that they're no longer going to track presidential approval ratings for some probably unrelated reasons.
Completely unrelated
Nothing to see here.
reasons, of course. Were you going on to say something, Crystal?
I think what this is all. Yeah, sorry. What it really shows is the lack of depth within the Liberal Party now, because they had to move her on. But who do you turn to? There's just like not a lot of options left. And even, obviously Angus Taylor had the numbers, like whatever. In the most recent lot of polling on who people would want to be the next Liberal leader after Susan Lee, like Angus Taylor's numbers were not good. Andrew Hastie's numbers, like nobody's numbers were good.
No.
Nobody really knows who it should be. So to bring that gender conversation full circle, the one thing that I will say, to me, the fact that they have so little depth and they refuse to appeal to half of the Australian voting population, all of this is tied to the fact that they still will not introduce gender quotas as part of their recruitment policy, and which is part of the reason why you have no depth. You haven't been nurturing, you've been ignoring half your potential pool of candidates. Like, of course, you're going to be in this position where you've got to go into a well that is now empty, and all that's at the bottom is Angus Taylor and Andrew Hastie.
And Antoun, I mean, the thing about Angus Taylor is that he has just so many controversies in his recent past that have really never been adequately addressed. He just sort of passed his words. He obfuscated around a lot of these things. Most egregiously and seriously would have been the Watergate scandal, where a company that he had been involved in for many years mysteriously was able to sell $80 million of sort of non-existent water that was enthusiastically purchased by Barnaby Joyce when he was Minister for Water. We can remember those glory days. So that's probably the worst. But there was also Jamland, where he sat in on meetings completely unrelated to his portfolio, sort of bullied Josh Frydenberg, who was then Minister for the Environment, from letting him sit in on these meetings when they were trying to investigate which grasses should be protected. He did not disclose that he owned properties that were going to be affected very materially and directly by these potential changes. So he's done things which are, by any measure, you would say, potentially corrupt, never answered for them. And yet just now we've moved on and he's the leader. And even in more kind of normal political terms, he was a disaster as Shadow Treasurer. He was a disaster as Energy Minister, and now is somehow elevated to their leader.
Right. Which suggests to me that I don't think the Liberals are going to be going anywhere with Angus Taylor. But I mean, it also speaks to, I think, what the Liberal Party has kind of represented, right? And I think it's very important for, voters to, have this front in mind, that Angus Taylor and the Liberal Party and Liberal MPs, think primarily for their own self-interest first. And when you want to become a leader of a of a significant political party, you need to have a vision for a nation. And I don't think Angus Taylor possesses a vision for Australia. We knew Susan Ley didn't possess a vision for Australia. She didn't articulate anything like that over the 9 months that she was leader. So I think we'll probably see the same Angus Taylor that we've seen over the last few years with all these scandals. Someone who prioritizes himself, someone who thinks how can he best get ahead. And, I think, broadly speaking, the Australian public are just kind of sick of that, whether they're kind of Labor-leaning, coalition-leaning, anti-establishment leaning. I think people are just kind of tired of politicians who prioritize themselves and self-interest and don't really bring anything to the table on how to improve the country. And I just kind of want to point out a stat that Max Chandler-Mather, the former Greens MP, wrote in his latest piece for Deep Cut. I like his work because he keeps digging up these these random stats, but it's telling. In 1967, 68% of Australians considered themselves to be lifetime voters of either Labor and the Coalition. Today, that's down to 24%. So, we all grew up in a kind of a climate in this country where you were either Labor or Liberal or National. That's gone. This world is gone. And I think what's happening with the Liberal Party is that they just haven't clocked on to the fact that the landscape has really changed in this country. They can't bank on a cohort of this nation giving them a sufficient amount of votes to get them into a position of influence, definitely not a position of government, but even at the moment, a position of influence as a party that's not in government. I mean, and choosing Angus Taylor suggests to me that they're not even reading the room. They're not reading the electorate. They're not learning any lessons from their electoral losses. And I don't know if there's any research being undertaken within the Liberal Party, but I mean, are they not seeing the things that we're seeing? That's kind of what's mind-boggling for me at the moment. It's a party that's just not evolving, but just staying stagnant as the rest of the nation evolves in various ways and leaving them behind.
Again, I'd argue that's the job of the Liberal Party leader to not evolve as the country does around it. I think that's inherent to what they do and what they've been about for a very long time.
I guess the question for that is that indicative of, I guess, the broader establishment not wanting to evolve? Because the Liberal Party is, what is the Liberal Party? The Liberal Party is the political wing of the corporate class, right? And they've always been. So is it a stubbornness on there? I don't think, are the establishment not witty enough to try and evolve in different ways? Or are they kind of digging their heels in?
They're co-opting and working their way inside the Labor Party is what's happening because they've recognised the one-party state situation we have going everywhere.
Right.
Well, but the corporate class maybe, but as an actual political party, and there are people who are turning up every day to work. I mean, James Patterson was saying, we have to change or die, but they seem to have overlooked the fact that you can change and die. And I think that is what is going to happen here, because you've already got Malcolm Turnbull when he wasn't saying that people called Taylor the best qualified idiot they've ever met. So thanks, Malcolm, from the sidelines. He's saying, Taylor's got to get out of the battle with One Nation and Pauline Hanson in order to survive, and needs to appeal to, the sensible centre and winning back the Teal seats, which is, I think, probably something that we would broadly agree with if they want to become relevant again. But at the very same time, you've got people like Tony Abbott saying, well, we've got to get back now talking about the flag, and we've got to talk about immigration. And so they're being pulled in completely opposite directions. And that's what Lee's problem was. And that's not going to change just because they've now got a well-qualified idiot as their leader.
But I think that was bound to happen. And I think this is, again, a culmination of, I can think, the last several election cycles, right? The Teals were the first implosion of the Liberals, really, when you think about it. It was the moderates who deserted the Liberal Party when they decided to go a bit too right and not really evolve with either climate or with, just social issues like, sexuality and women's rights and so forth. So they lost their traditional heartland inside the cities. And now they're not right enough for their rural electoral base, who are now deserting them and going to One Nation. But even underneath that, I think it's always important to look at the polls that happen beneath, what's behind, I think, the surge and the shifts in the, voting landscape. 75% of One Nation voters think the political system is broken. So they have no faith in the political system. So they're anti-establishment.
Yeah.
And of the surge in their polls, the cohort that's supporting them, or where are they getting that support from? Baby boomers and Gen X men who say they are suffering a great deal of financial stress at the moment. And importantly, they're also outpolling the Greens in that same cohort, millennial men who also say they are dealing with great financial stress. So underneath all of this is a growing portion of a restive population that is feeling the pinch of the economic times that we're living in. And and they're looking for a new home, right? Because they're not getting answers, and they're not going to get answers from the establishment parties, either Labor or the coalition. And they're scurrying around finding, okay, who is going to channel my anger at the moment? And so I think that's what we need to be talking about, because if we keep just sticking to the kind of the superficial conversation of who's the leader of the Liberal Party, it's irrelevant to the undercurrents and the underlying trends that we're seeing. And if we don't pay attention to them, we're going to get a result like the US and in parts of Europe, where fascist parties end up emerging because that anger gets channeled into them. And I was in the United States when Trump was dismissed in 2015. I was there for the whole election cycle, 2015 and 2016. Oh, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It happened. And look where we are today. So I think we need to shift the conversation away from the Liberal Party. They've put themselves into irrelevance. They have made themselves irrelevant. So why are we still talking about them? Let's talk
Yep, good
about the
point.
underlying trends that we can see are taking place.
And it'll be
Absolutely.
interesting, Crystal, that we'll maybe see some of those underlying trends play out in what will be Angus Taylor's first test, a by-election in Susan Lee's old seat of Farah, where an independent did quite well in the 2025 election, got up to 20%. It was Susan Lee's very high primary vote of 43% that saved her. Now, obviously, she'll be gone. Any personal support that she has within that will evaporate. You'd imagine that the Liberals would try and pre-select a woman, but you don't know. So it is possible that we may see disruption there, and Taylor kind of be kind of hobbled at the knees in the fall at the very first hurdle.
It will be very interesting. I mean, I know everybody will be watching to see what happens with One Nation. Should they run someone? I'm very sure that they
They
will.
got
The other
6.6% last time.
Yeah, they might have someone more high profile. You know, they might be able to attract someone more high profile now to plop in
Yeah.
there and see how they go. Farah is very interesting. This is a little bit of a tangent. I spent too much time looking at this today, so I'm not going to get into all of it right here. But I kept seeing this comment pop up in a few different places when David Littleproud first started agitating against Susan Lee, saying that the Nationals was aimed more at her directly, because there is a grudge held within the Nationals that they felt that she had stolen a seat that was theirs, Farah being a rural New South Wales seat. I would encourage everybody to go back and look at the history of this. It kind of traces back to the 1984 federal election. There was like a redistribution. The Liberal, whose last name was Fife, I'm forgetting his first name right now, but he decided to shift with he held Farah. He was from Wagga Wagga. Wagga Wagga got redistributed into Hume, actually, which is Angus Taylor's seat now. So he decided, I'm going to go with my constituents. I'm going to shift over to Hume, which opened up Farah, which was then won by Tim Fischer, who went on to become the deputy leader of the Nationals. He stayed in that seat, held Farah until his retirement in 2001. Then it's open season. Everybody fields candidates, and that is when Susan Lee is elected for the Liberals. So I don't know how legit this is. It seems like there was a grudge being held that the
There's
Liberals were holding
personal animus.
a rural seat that they were not entitled to. It was very personal. And so was this part of the, closed door machinations that in exchange for rolling Susan and pushing her out to resign from politics, as we now know that she's done, that, will the Libs field a weak candidate? Will they not field anyone? Like, is this a gift to the Nationals? And will that, Antoun, as you're saying, will that come down to a test between rather the Libs and One Nation, but One Nation and the Nationals for how many other rural and regional seats be collected? Because that's the other part of the data is showing a stronger support, or supporters of One Nation are more likely to be from regional Australia rather than metropolitan Australia. So again, I think that question about like how the demographics are shifting and where people are feeling those frustrations and that disenchantment with the political establishment, where exactly it's happening and who's battling it out, I think really depends on a lot of those demographics. And so, yeah, Farrell will be interesting to watch for some of those, to see where some of those chips will fall.
Oh, well, there'll be lots to watch. Will Price get back on the front bench? Will little Timmy Wilson become Shadow Treasure as he wants to? And what will Andrew Hastie do? That will be conversations for another day. Moving on, Dave, I'll throw to you because you have a package that you're going to introduce. You've been putting together footage from the protests earlier this week.
Yeah. We'll go to this package that our video guy, Jeremy Jungles Ray, has been putting together, which I think it speaks for itself. We'll play that and we'll have a chat about it.
Great.
Psyched up to hurt people. It's wild. It's like football. They're like, yeah, let us hurt some people.
Did your restrictions on protest create a tinderbox in the CBD last night?
No. New South Wales Police were charged multiple times by a group of protesters. New South Wales Police were charged. New South Wales Police were charged.
World is it when a so-called democracy silences and surveils academic research, art, music and sport? And yet it profits off, it funds genocide. Shame! A so-called democracy that punishes peaceful protesters like us, but welcomes a war criminal with open arms. Yes, because we are a spineless colony of the United States and we depend on their military might. Say it with me, from Gadigal to Gaza, globalize the Intifada. One more time, from Gadigal to Gaza, globalize the Intifada. Thank you.
Now, despite what you may be hearing in much of the media, there are growing numbers of, huge numbers of Jews around the world who oppose what is going on in Palestine every single day. The simple fact is that Israeli actions endanger all of us, including Jews, all of us, because what Israel is doing What Israel is doing claims to be in our name, in my name. And believe me when I say it is not in my name at all.
To the right of return. Because this is not just about ceasefire. And this is not just about a genocide that's been ongoing for over 77 years. The Nakba never stopped. It kept transforming and manifesting in different ways. And what we see today, the genocide that has claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza, is just one form of that manifestation. 2 years in, we are still here. 2 years in, we're not going away. And we will continue to talk about Palestine. We will continue. We will continue. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, as he has been telling, will tell us again to bring the temperature down, to disagree agreeably, apparently. We all know what this means. We know that that's code for the Labour government telling us, please don't make us feel uncomfortable. But we have a message here, don't we, here in our thousands today, that Prime Minister, we are not here to make you feel comfortable. We are here to hold you accountable. But it's not just Herzog's record in regard to this genocide. In 2015, his campaign used an image of a Muslim man in the crosshairs of a rifle. In 2016, he said his party must not appear to be Arab lovers. In 2018, he described interfaith and interracial marriage as a plague. In 2025, he described Israel illegal settlements in the West Bank as a cornerstone of Judaism. And yet our Prime Minister has shamefully framed this visit as a gesture of solidarity and as providing support to Jewish Australians. This framing sends two clear messages. First, welcoming a leader directly implicated in the genocide of Palestinians in the name of social cohesion reflects the erasure of Palestinian lives by our political leaders. It sends a message that violence and racism towards Palestinians are politically expendable. And presenting this visit as providing some sort of solace for Jews only reinforces the conflation of Jewish identity with the Israeli state. And that conflation doesn't just fuel anti-Semitism, but it helps sustain the expendability and erasure of Palestinian lives. It enables our leaders to promote the lie that support for Israel is synonymous with supporting Jews, and thereby putting this support beyond scrutiny and framing our movement's support for Palestinian lives as inherently anti-Semitic. And so I, like many Jewish people here today, have been forced again to reject this blatant politicization of our grief and to say that without qualification, this visit is not in our names, that Israel's genocide is not in any of our names.
Australia is a signatory to the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. This means we must punish acts of genocide. The Commission recommended that Herzog be investigated and prosecuted by the International Criminal Court. The MUA calls for Herzog's arrest and prosecution. of the international laws to which Australia has long been a signatory.
And you are the voices who are willing to come out for over 2 years to say, not in our name. We do not stand with genocide. We do not stand with ethnic cleansing. We do not stand with apartheid. We do not stand with murder. We stand with life. We stand with life. And that is something the Israeli state takes every single day, every minute, every second. I was asked on Saturday, and it just kept going through my head. I was asked, what would you say to Herzog if he's right in front of you? I just looked at the reporter and said, what do you say to a person who cannot see you as a human being? When they look at a Palestinian face and body, they do not see a human being. They see something less than an animal. It brought back memories. Memories of me as a child when I was 6 years old and a soldier pointing a gun at my head. With tanks in the streets and tear gas being shot at us coming back from school. And snipers being shot into the crowd. It brought back memories of seeing my grandfather being released from prison, beaten and broken physically, but unbowed and uncowed, refusing to be silenced. It brought back memories of his words. They may damage my body, they may break my bones, but granddaughter, they will never take away my will. They will never take away my voice. They will never take away my existence. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid.
I found where Isaac Herzog's speaking in Melbourne this afternoon. This is in front of me. Let's see what's happening.
Zionism is falling and it will fall and Palestine will be liberated and we will be free and we will return to our homeland. Mark my words. It is also very critical to understand that the violence experienced in Gadigal in Sydney is very indicative of the colonial history that on this continent. It is very indicative. This is not a surprising occurrence that the cops did what they did to people, to peaceful protesters in Gadigal. That is not a surprise. When there are Aboriginal deaths in custody increasing year after year after year, know that this is not a surprise. Know that this is state-sanctioned terrorism. Know that this is state-sanctioned terrorism and it is expanding to each and every single one of you through the investments of Palantir, through the investments of Albert Systems, and through the investments and trade ties that are expanding before our very eyes on this continent all the way to the Zionist entity that is so-called Israel.
Do you ever think about that? That you are actually protecting the wrong people, that you are protecting the criminals, and that they make you, your bosses, protect criminals? People who exploit unarmed civilians, target them.
There is an arrest warrant for a certain individual inside this building, and the orders have come down from above that you are all to proceed in the arrest of President Herzog for war crimes.
وحب إلى الشعب في أستراليا الذي خرج رفضا لزيارة الرئيس الإسرائيلي إلى أستراليا. رسالة حب وتقدير وفخر في هذا الشعب العظيم على جهوده الجبارة، على عطائه العظيم، على مواقفه المشرفة مع القضية الفلسطينية، نصرة لغزة ونصرة لشعبها المضطهد المظلوم. نحيي صمودكم ونحيي وقوفكم العظيم معنا أيها الشعب الحر الجميل. بارك الله فيكم. الحكومة في أستراليا العدول عن قراراتها التعسفية وإجراءاتها الوحشية ضد هذا الشعب العظيم الذي خرج نصرة لغزة. على الحكومة في أستراليا أن تقف موقف مشرف، أن تقف عند مسؤولياتها مع مطالب هذا الشعب، مع أحرار هذا الشعب. أيها الشعب الأسترالي أنت عظيم، مارس واستمر في جهودك، في عطائك، في تضحياتك من أجل غزة. نحن هنا نحييكم ونشد على أيديكم. نحن هنا في غزة نحبكم ونكن لكم كل تقدير وشكر على هذه المواقف.
So Isaac Herzog was in town for 4 or 5 days this week, and he was met with red carpets, grotesque fawning, the whole treatment from the state, but also very, very huge protests in Melbourne, Sydney, across the country, regional centres. And on Monday, those protests were met with police brutality, with absurd authoritarian overreach, in a sense that I believe, having looked at lots of the evidence, is extremely premeditated to send a message to this movement to quash it. Because what this movement wants is an end to colonialism, an end to racism, an end to the genocide in Palestine. And what our establishment wants is for the rest of us to shut the fuck up about that. It's a bit annoying. We want you to keep buying stuff, please. This is awkward. And then on Thursday, he came to Melbourne after we'd all witnessed the police brutality in Sydney. And I'm sure that was weighing on protesters' minds, whether they were deciding to come back out into the streets on Thursday. And thankfully, so many of them did. It was a very heartening appearance. There were so many cops all over the city. If you wanted to rob a jewelry store in Coburg, last night would have been the time to do it. It was a grotesque allocation of resources. Herzog spoke at an event away from the city, sort of along City Road. I went down there. There were only a small number of protesters because these location for these events are kept secret because for obvious reasons. And so it got out along the activist networks, and 100 or 200 people protested, and there would have been, God, I don't know, 400 or 500 cops guarding a fence that sort of no one was at, or no one was under threat whatsoever. It was a really strange use of state resources. I know there is I heard from my comments, I understand that there is a class of Australian that doesn't really give a fuck about the genocide, but is deeply concerned about wasting taxpayer money. And even those guys seemed up in arms about this one. Antoun, you were there, standing next to you on the steps at Flinders Street. What was your take from the day and the week?
Oh, the week. Why don't we go with the whole week? First, why don't we go for the last month? Can I just say, before all this went down, I was hoping for a slower December, January, and February, and we haven't had a single break. Anyway, but look, to the first point you were making about, why governments, state and federal, let's just say Labor, because Labor is running the whole country, right, are so determined to kind of crush or thwart this movement is because there is a domestic element that's starting to emerge. It's no longer like, I've been to pro-Palestine protests since I was born. So I remember the ones from the early 2000s when the second Intifada happened. We'd get 20,000, but most would be, people from my community. This movement over the last 2 years is incredibly different from anything related to the Middle East that I've been engaged in or witnessed in this country. It's, you looked at the people yesterday, even the ones that we caught in our videos. There is a lot of white people. I've never seen so many white people that are just so passionate about what's happening in Palestine, but also everything that's now connected to that. I've never seen so many Jews come out, not just protest, but leading some of these kind of segments of the protest movement, and being so involved and so engaged and doing and amplifying their activism in myriad of ways. I've never seen so many Jews do that. There's always been a cohort of anti-Zionist Jews, but not to this extent, where there's actually, I think, starting to be a bit of a rupture within that community. And I think what's happening is that there's a broader awakening that is not just confined to Palestine. Palestine is a center, I think, at the core of this kind of malaise or this kind of a rot that we're all starting to see peel away, and everything that starts to get surfaced, whether it's the Epstein files, whether it's the Trump administrations, whether it's the overt kind of connections with this kind of elite billionaire class that seeps into government. It also includes Australia, our military ties to Israel, how deeply
from the IDF and the New South Wales Police Force,
but also how deeply entrenched we are with the United States, to the point where I don't even think we can extricate ourselves, even if we've got a leader tomorrow saying let's pull back. We are so deeply entrenched. And I think the Herzog visit is just one of those dots that's just feeding this awakening of like, this is fucked. This is all fucked. And it's coming at a time also of a cost of living crisis, right? Where people are feeling it acute and can't just disappear into their middle class happiness to distract themselves from what's happening around the world. Everyone's feeling the pinch, which means they're paying attention now to the issues, trying to work out what is going on. Why is my life in disarray? We're talking about the cohort of the country that's apathetic and probably doesn't care about anything. They're starting to care because they can't, now they're struggling to pay their rents and their mortgages, and their food prices are going up, right? So I think that's what Labor and the political class and the corporate class in this country fears. It's not just a bunch of Arabs and Muslims protest. We've been protesting for 30 years. No one cares about us. It's everyone else that's coming to these protests. It's everyone else now saying always was, always will be. It's everyone else now starting to question the legitimacy of the governance models that we have in this country. That's what they fear. Australia's never had a rebellion, never had a revolution, never had the stuff that we see in France every 6 months. But they fear that starting to emerge. And I don't think they know what to do about it. I really don't know. I don't think they know what to do about it. We have an elite that's never really been challenged in this country. And I don't think they know what to do about it. I think that's where we are at the moment.
I mean, what they do seem to be doing... Sorry, Dave, you go.
I was just going to say, I agree entirely, Antoun, with all of that. And I think that one of the smart things that the speakers at these rallies do over and over again is link all these struggles. One of the speakers on Flinders, I forget her name, on the Thursday night, she was talking a lot about Palantir and the $1 billion secret contract that our government has signed with Peter Thiel's company in the Epstein files, responsible for tracking people so they can get droned to death inside Gaza.
Now at our Coles supermarkets as well.
Exactly. And these pieces of information are crucial parts of people's political awakening as they're mapping the world, how all of this really works. That's the other strain. There are people that are going to realize that's what's happening to your future. They can either go down that way, or they will listen to the people saying, oh no, it's the weakest people in society. It's the brown people. They're the reason why you can't afford anything. They're basically the two strains where this discontentment can be channeled. And the Labor Party stands in between those two, and it will get nothing, basically.
But I'll say one thing about this. because we're seeing it in the US and it's now starting to come here. Because I do, watch and listen to the far right influencers in this country who are growing, by the way. They have as big of audiences as us, all of us combined collectively. And even though, they'll start off with this whole, from the same foundation that we'll start off. Cost of living crisis, everything's corrupt, government's corrupt. But then they veer towards immigration. But where they're connecting with, I think, I'm not going to say the pro-Palestine movement, but just this kind of, because I think it's morphing beyond that now. This kind of like maybe left-leaning anti-establishment movement is that they're also pointing out the role of the pro-Israel lobby. But the fear here, and this is the fear that the Jewish Council has been banging on about, is that it's when the right start pointing out the pro-Israel lobby, they start morphing it into anti-Semitic hatred towards Jews. And I'm starting to see signs of that beginning to emerge on the far right, because I think on the pro-Palestine left side, there's a huge amount of effort expended towards making sure that we distinguish between Israel, Zionism, and Jews. I don't think that's happening on the far right, at least not from what I'm seeing. And so I think that's a kind of concern. I think that's also, reasonably felt, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Crystal, there were really, and I guess this goes to the points that Antoun and Dave are making about people who may previously have not been that exercised by the issue of Gaza, are now very exercised by the overreach in terms of state control, whether that be in the first instance cracking down on the right to protest at all. But on Monday, we saw really disturbing images of the way the police were behaving and the violent ways that they were seeking to first crack down, then to kettle, a new verb that most of us didn't know before these protests started to happen, and really made it very difficult for people to be able to disperse at all as they were being chased, as they were being pepper sprayed, as they were being tear gassed. I mean, they were pretty incredible sights, which, I mean, Minns has gone all in to defending and characterising it as the state having to deal with violent protests as opposed to, as Dave says, the police turning up with their own agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to Dave's point, the government, the Minns government in this instance, but governments broadly, I don't think it can be stated too many times, they don't like protest. They think it is annoying. They think it is frustrating, because any protest, I mean, even aside from the topic we're talking about right now, it's about typically something a government has done that people don't like, or something that they're not doing that people want them to do. So it's always based in like this sort of criticism of power and authority. So of course, the power and authority wants that to stop. And there are some levers that they have to do that. There are, legislation. There's legal things that they can do to try and restrict where protests can or attempt to restrict where protests can happen. There is the policing element. But there's also, I think, why Minns has been so reluctant to give any ground, make any apologies, say that anything went wrong. I mean, I know now that there is going to be some sort of investigation into police conduct.
By the police, so it's not independent.
Yeah, how rigorous that will be exactly is not, I'm not suggesting that at all, but they're going to look at something, I guess. But the reason why Minns will not back down or make any apologies or gestures for any of this is because he really needs it to look as if protest itself is inherently violent and risky and unsafe and unpredictable, because part of, as I said, there's legal levers that they can pull to restrict it. There is a policing element that they can pull to restrict it. The other thing that they can do that I think that he is trying to do here is seed the idea within the community that it is risky to go to these things. And so then people start to kind of doubt and second guess. Like I've had conversations with probably a handful of young people, some before the Monday night protest in Sydney and some after, who were saying that they were either worried about going because of how much the New South Wales government and New South Wales police had telegraphed that there would be a police presence and that this could get out of control. So they were like, I'm feeling a little bit worried. And these are people who have been going to protests. Like, these are not people who are turning up necessarily for the first time. And then after those unbelievable scenes that we saw, well, I shouldn't say unbelievable, after those violent scenes that we saw, then another group of people saying, yeah, it's really freaked me out. And now I'm kind of like, I'm just not sure. I feel a little bit, I feel worried. And that is a very normal thing to feel, especially young people. And then it's not just the protesters themselves, right? It's the social environment around that. So it's then like your mums and your dads and your aunties and your uncles who know that that you want to be active, that you have been active in these spaces. And then they're like, are you sure it's safe for you to go? I don't think you should go because we've seen this crazy stuff on the TV. We've seen it in the news. So that's part of, it's part of the strategy. And if he concedes any ground that the chaos was caused by police presence, that is admitting that it is not inherently protest that is chaotic and unpredictable and violent, and he can't have that if this strategy is to work. So that, I think, is really important to spell out what was being done here from beginning to end, because it wasn't just, you can send police to any kind of public rally and it does not inevitably become violent, right? Like, that's not a given. The fact that they were talking about it beforehand was part of this strategy, that even if nothing eventuated, that they were still trying to deter by suggesting that it might, that they were still trying to thin the numbers of who would turn up.
Right.
So I think that's really important to make clear. It's this like social acceptance and license for protest. And Antoun, as you're saying, because it is becoming so much more, people are embracing it and people are seeing and wanting to turn up, and it is growing. They definitely want to put a clamp on that. The other thing...
They want to... Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, the other thing that now I have completely lost my train of thought. Sorry. That's all right.
Well, that's
Sorry,
right.
that's my fault.
No, can I just say, Dave, I know you've got a comment. Well, just quickly say, and then throw to you, Dave, is that, part of what Minns is also doing is, and we've seen this in the US, is there's all this footage of what actually happened, and yet they're trying to recharacterize what people are seeing with their own eyes. So Minns saying, oh, sure, some of the footage doesn't look good, but it has to be kept into some nebulous context, which is unexplained. And don't judge the actions of police on 10 seconds of what you see on social media. You need to see what happened just before that. And it's like there's endless footage of everything that was happening, and we did see it. So to just deny what we're seeing with our own eyes is very Trumpian. Dave, to you.
Very Orwellian.
It's the same logic as insisting that the context for a war criminal's visit here is just Bondi and not all the war crimes they've been doing. It's the same absurdity. Look, to people in the community that are wanting to be at these places and feeling unsafe, I get it, but also understand that staying home in the face of authoritarian violence only keeps you safe for a little while. It's not a long-term plan. It's actually how you lose. I have lots of friends in Minnesota right now, and they are at the point where they're hiding neighbors in their houses. You want to get ahead of this stuff before this type of state violence is normalized. And the only power we have on the streets is strength in numbers. So this idea that you protect, it's inherently selfish to just think only about your own safety, not about the community's safety, because that's what this movement is about. It is about the entire community's safety.
Right. The other thing I'll add to that, I think Crystal made some really interesting points, and it's exactly why in my response to what happened on Monday, I said Chris Minns was one of the most dangerous Australian leaders that we've had in living memory. And the reason why I said that is based essentially on what you said, Crystal, and articulated so well. Those of us who come from parts of the world where violence is the norm, state violence is the norm, authoritarian regimes, we kind of know how authoritarian regimes work. And what they do is they instill fear in the population, and they entirely run on fear. As soon as that fear crumbles, as we saw in the Arab Spring in 2011, these regimes fall, or chaos ensues when Israel and the US get involved. And what Min's, everything you articulated, Crystal, is exactly, I guess, in the playbook of what authoritarians do, right? They want to instill fear. No one in a democracy should be scared to protest. It is your inherent right to go out and protest. It is your inherent right to scream if the government's doing something that you don't like. The fact that he's trying to sow fear into the people of New South Wales so they would second guess, that is in the authoritarian playbook. And as Dave was saying, it doesn't stop there. You give them an inch, they'll run a mile. So I think the antidote to this is for people to stop thinking individually and start thinking collectively. Because I was saying to Dave yesterday at the protest in Melbourne, we had 30,000 people there. Even if there were 2,000 cops, that's 30,000 people, right? So our numbers we outnumber them in terms of the masses and the people. Think of yourself as part of a collective body, and you won't feel weak or scared. You'll feel powerful. I think that's the mindset, and it's a shift.
And part of, I think, what is changing and contributing to more people, being willing to turn out to these things, police being used as a oppressive tool by an authority, this is not a new thing. Also, this has been happening since the First Fleet put boot on the soil. What is different now is that everybody has a phone. Everyone is recording what is happening. And so we are seeing an extended vision of what is taking place. The people who aren't there are seeing extended vision. We're seeing multiple angles. I mean, that's why I think Min's trying this line to sort of suggest there was context that, that we haven't seen that meant that it was okay for the police to do these things. Well, everybody has a phone. I think if there was context, it would have come out by now.
We'd see that
and
too.
that is part of why people have been feeling, I think, more encouraged to come out, because we are actually seeing the context now. In the 70s and 80s in Queensland, when there was, pretty intense crackdowns of police on various groups of people under the government there, there wasn't phones to record.
Yeah.
And for people to circulate their own perspective on what had happened, their own, point of view, their own vision on what had happened. All you'd be able to see is what made, the nightly news. And to give credit to journalists that do go and report on protests, well, there's always a lot more protesters than there are journalists or cameramen. So you're only going to get the angle of what you're in front of. But now we have everybody here with phones, everybody I think having an understanding of that you need to capture things for posterity, because it will eventually come around to statements by police, statements by government saying things happened that didn't happen, or what have you. So I just wanted to add, it's those damn phones, and we should keep taking the phones.
We should absolutely
what takes
do
place.
that. And, then we've got the Prime Minister saying that we need to turn the temperature down, as if it's the protesters who have been turning the temperature up. And that this sort of social cohesion, as Rachel Withers said last week on this show, I mean, essentially that just means people staying silent, that dissent from this broad political class point of view. I mean, I think it's important to remember in relation to Herzog's visit is that the invitation was initially issued by Jeremy Liebler, the president of the Zionist Federation of Australia. He issued the invitation directly following Bondi because he wanted him to come and thought this would be of comfort to the Jewish community. And then it basically snookered Albanese to say, well, he's going to come as a private citizen, or you have to now back in the protocol to bring him here. So, look, it may not have been Albanese's idea, but then the whole visit has been couched as him giving solace and comfort to the Jewish community, pastoral care, if you like, as if he's some kind of religious leader, as opposed to the head of state of a nation which is currently enacting genocide in Gaza. And those facts are just erased from the debate that we're currently having about the protesters and the violence that was enacted against a lot of them. That was just my little spiel.
Can I tack onto that spiel?
Please do.
2 seconds, because I just want to give and that was the narrative that mainstream media went with, who are just kind of mouthpieces of the government and the powerful these days, in framing this visit, right? And I was reading them. I mean, I don't bother with Murdoch media. I can just predict what they say. We can all predict what they'll write. But from the SMHs to the ABCs to the Guardian, they all were framing, Herzog's visit within that kind of, holier than thou Israeli leader comes to pay tribute and, give comfort to the Jewish community. And if it wasn't for independent media, all of us, The Shot, Deep Cut, Cheek Media, Et Media, Michael West, the various independent influencers who have strong followings and everyone who turned out to those protests, if it wasn't for us shifting that narrative and actually bringing facts to the table, the context that we're all talking about, that mainstream narrative would have stayed, but it didn't. And I think we've seen over the last few days that mainstream coverage now try to play catch up with the narrative that we've set and we've established, which is based on truth, fact, and context. So I just want to, it's a shout out to everyone really in independent media in this ecosystem. And it shows that, the government can try and parrot their talking points through their mainstream media that kind of works on their behalf. But it's not going to stick. It's not going to stick.
Well said, Antoun. I'd echo all of that. And I also want to shout out to Karl Stefanovic for saying that the protesters arrived in Sydney looking for violence. Like, what a sellout stooge you are.
And the Muslim community members who were praying, who we now know had been given permission from the police to pray in that spot where they were not blocking any traffic and they were completely legally and then were violently dragged away by the police. They had been given permission by the police to do just that. And that Stefanovic also couched that as potentially them baiting the police by just enacting and observing religious prayer. Look, we are coming to the end of another show.
If a racist fug is baited, it's the problem of the racist fug, not the person for existing with brown skin. It's fucking absurd.
Yep, completely absurd. So who knows what this next week will bring? Herzog has gone home, and whilst he was on the flight home, he had to respond to Trump yet again calling for Netanyahu to be pardoned from his legal troubles, in which James Packer has a small cameo as well. But before we go, I'm going to ask our panellists and Dave if they have a top tip for the week, something which is you're keeping your eye on for the days ahead. Crystal, any top tips from you?
Well, my top tip is not necessarily for just this coming week, but South Australia state election is next month. Joe, I think you can be contributing maybe a little bit to Crikey around that. But yes, it will be one to watch. As we were talking about in the conversation, the by-election in Farah being a bit of a litmus test for how this new splintered, fragmented right will fare at election. I think the same is true of the state election in South Australia. One Nation has been agitating with some Conservative politicians there over the past 18 months, almost 2 years, trying to get some pretty heinous restrictions and bans on abortions through Parliament. Yep. So I'm sure Pauline Hanson is just raring and ready to go and try to get some more representatives elected to Parliament. So that is something that I will be watching very closely. As I say, hopefully, Crikey, we're going to have some coverage of the state election. But
I will just say that they do have
encouragement to everybody outside of South Australia to watch.
To keep an eye on it, and with their new kind of the blonde Angus Taylor there in Corey Bernardi heading up One Nation in South Australia, which I cannot think about without laughing. So very funny. Antoun, top tips from you?
Oh, I don't think it's a top tip, but I'm saying keep your eyes out. Continue to keep your eyes out for the Epstein files because it's there's 3 million files, and I think I think those of us journalists who are trying, and everyone who's trying to read into them probably only gotten as far as 10,000 files, and it just seems every week more and more is just being unearthed. So we're already seeing some fiery kind of conversations and exchanges in Congress.
Yeah,
with Pam Bondi
on
Attorney
last week,
General.
just
Yeah,
kind of incredible
right.
performance there. I don't think that would have
Yeah,
actually, not that this is what it's about, but would have endeared her to Trump either. I mean, all of those cabinet secretaries are all only ever performing for an audience of one, and I'm not sure that would have gone down well with him any more than it did with everybody else, including all the
right.
survivors who were standing behind her.
Right. And the Democrats have kind of pointed out that several Trump officials, including the Commerce Secretary, are very knee-deep in the Epstein files. So I think it's right to say that the US administration is pretty much run by pedophiles.
Yeah, I mean, the
That's my
Commerce
tip of the week.
Secretary, Lutnick he's been caught out and out lying, and even then, no consequences. Dave, your top tip for the week.
Yeah.
Antoun was talking before about how there are all these white people involved in this movement nowadays. And I think, that is the desire for this place to be better, the post-colonial Australia. And I think no one, like Grace Tame, personal friend, exemplifies that really well. I'm just declaring that because I'm not unbiased in this, but we now have the Zionist lobby and Tony Abbott calling for her to get stripped of her Australian of the Year, which she has already won and just is. And it is that futile fury at a new world emerging. So just solidarity with Grace and, fuck the rest of these pricks.
Indeed. Well, look, viewers, thank you very much for being with us for another week. As ever, we hope that by now you have subscribed. We hope you're continuing to engage by liking. We hope if you've got a spare $1, you might throw it our way. You could get a lovely T-shirt that Dave is currently modelling. You just need to lean back there, designed by the fabulous Fiona Katauskas. But thanks again to Antoun and Crystal for joining us on this week's Sunday Shot. We look forward to seeing you next week.